Mm, mm, mm. First things first, welcome to CNN. I'm your host, Kirk Kennedy. Let's go in. On this channel, we take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. I don't know, some of you are old enough to remember this old Popeye cartoon. It was Popeye, and it had this really microphone thin girl named Olive Oil. I mean, she was like a microphone stand with hair and teeth. And then he had this big dude, looked like me, big dude named Bluto. And that was his arch rival. And Popeye used to, whenever he would get fed up, right, Bluto would be coming for him. He would get fed up, and Popeye would always say this: "That's all I can stand, and I can't stand no more." And then he would eat some spinach, and then his arms would get big, and then he was like a superhero, and he would go and just knock people around. This is kind of how I feel right now. This is kind of how I feel. So I'm always watching the landscape. You know, I'm not posting as much, but I'm watching what people are saying. And I got to say, stop the cap. Stop the cap. Stop the cap. I'm actually genuinely shocked. What I'm about to tell you in this video, I'm genuinely shocked. And I don't usually genuinely get shocked a lot because I just seen a lot of things, been through a lot of things in my life. I'm not always shocked or surprised. You know, some of my favorite verses in the scriptures are when it says Jesus marveled at their lack of faith. Like Jesus, who was God, but did not allow himself to fully be God and know everything at all times. He genuinely was surprised at the lack of faith that people had. Like when he healed a man who was 40 years old, born blind, and people still thought he ain't the one. He said he marveled at their unbelief. I am genuinely shocked at what I'm seeing right now. So this whole video is going to explain to you why and what it is. Let me say two things for a disclaimer before we dive in. The first is this. I recently got a comment from someone who said to me something like, I think they were just questioning. You know, they were a conservative questioning like, where are my videos about the left? And here's what I said to them. I said that when the left was in office, I criticized the left heavy. As I will in this video in a little bit, you'll see what I'm talking about. But I said the Republicans are in office, conservatives are in office. They're the ones right now making the decisions. For all intents and purposes, the left has been demolished, right? They're not a threat to Trump right now, to the conservatives, right? So my concerns are more the political party that's in play when I make these kinds of decisions and to talk about these things, but also because I'm a conservative by default, and the conservative Republicans typically have the moral Christian high ground. You know, Christians are on the left as well, but Republicans tend to see themselves as the moral high ground because of their policies. And so Jesus said, to whom much is given, much is required. Okay? So that's the case. So please understand, whenever I say things, one, I'm talking about the party that's in office primarily. And all of it. All right, the second thing that I want to give a disclaimer for is whenever I make these types of videos, it proves the point as people get offended. Some people unsubscribe and so forth. Some thank me for it, and I'm grateful for that. I will always make videos that critique anything that is not on the side of truth, or I will show what I think the current hypocrisies are. Like my other video about Candace Owens, where I was grateful that she's exposing the hypocrisy. She exposed the hypocrisy on the left, and I liked it. There were things that she said I banged with tough. She exposes the hypocrisy on the right now. I like it. There are things that I bang with that are tough. It's interesting to see this. Now, I'm saying this for a reason, because this will help you understand what the one drop rule is and why I'm calling this video the new one drop rule. I was watching a video. I watch videos all the time. I was watching a video of different people. I have friends who do this, bigger platforms than me. And I was watching some videos of them just talking about political discourse and different things. And right now, the hot button issue is Christian nationalism or white Christian nationalism, whatever you want to call it. So I was watching these videos earlier today, and I've watched them throughout the week. And I was genuinely shocked. I'm genuinely shocked by some of my brothers in the faith and sisters in the faith and so forth. I see it on Facebook. But it hits differently when it's on YouTube. I was genuinely shocked. And as I was watching a video today, I was like, this is the one drop rule all over again. This is the one drop rule. I saw it happen years ago, and now I'm seeing it happen now. So let me explain what the one drop rule is. Stay with me, because this is not going to go where you think it's going to go. But stay with me, all right? I always have to qualify, because I'm a big black dude, that I'm not woke, right? I'm not, because I'm critiquing. People are so easily offended nowadays. Whatever happened to just truth? Remember truth, TROOPH? Whatever happened to truth? Well, we could just listen to truth and evaluate truth. Anyway, I grew up on sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Now, ain't nobody even worried about sticks and stones. You don't even got to use no sticks or no stones. Now you just have a difference of opinion, and people fold up. Like the Wicked Witch of the West when she got a little bit of water on her. I'm melting. It's fascinating to watch this play out. But having said that, let me explain to you. Stay with me, I promise. This will be beneficial, especially for those of you who, like me, are followers of Christ. All right? Let me explain to you what the one drop rule is. Here's what the one drop rule is. Let me read this to you. The one drop rule was a Jim Crow era racial ideology and the legal doctrine, this was codified in law, that defined anyone, even with a single ancestor of African descent, as black, regardless of appearance or proportion of ancestry, right? The idea originated in the American South after slavery became legally codified in several states during the early 20th century. It evolved from colonial era efforts to control interracial relationships and maintain a rigid racial hierarchy. The rule reflected hypodescent, the principle that a child of a mixed union automatically belonged to the group with the lower social status, in this case, the black racial group. Its primary purpose was to preserve white racial purity and reinforce the boundaries of segregation under Jim Crow laws. All right, let me explain to you now what I mean when I say that we are in the one drop rule all over again. I do not mean racially, like what we just read. That was the context of the one drop rule. Essentially, what it said is, if you have if your great grandmother was black or was half black or quarter black, they would consider you black. You are not a part of the pure white race. That's what they would consider it. It's called the one drop rule. This was a real thing. You can look this up. That was what I read to you was real. All right. But what it really was about was categorizing anyone into one group of people that you did not like or did not think deserved any social status. So at the time, black people were that people group, right? There are other people groups that have had that happen to them, not to the same degree as black Americans or whatever, but like, Irish and Italian. These are people, different immigrants and stuff like that. And that could be happening right now. But this idea of the one drop rule is essentially saying that if this one thing is true of you, then everything, you belong to this whole situation, right? You could have been someone who was white, never even knew you had this ancestry, found out at the last minute, and now you are considered black and you are denied the privileges of what you had because you are now a part of this people group that people don't like. The one drop rule is happening again as an ideology, not specifically about race. Let me explain to you now further what I mean. Today, there is a significant debate. I watched a friend of mine do a video on Christian nationalism. And in the video, I've seen a few of these videos. It's the same thing. Now, people will say stuff like, well, what does Christian nationalism mean? It's all these definitions. And then they will largely push back and say that Christian nationalism is just a term that people use to take Christians who have biblical principles out of the public square or to dismiss their influence in conversations and all this type of stuff, right? And I think there are some people that do that. But I watched the people that I watched that defend it, that think like, well, no, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. They're making it seem like when someone uses that term, they're using it only because they're trying to go after these values, Christians with biblical values, right? And I remember when I watched this video today, I just had this thought of like, wait a minute, where have I heard this before? Where have I heard this logic before? Like being given a name that you don't think represents reality, that you feel like is used against you to denigrate what you actually stand for and believe. Where have I heard this before? I'm watching tons of people, white and black, who are conservatives, say that Christian nationalism is a term used largely by the left to dismiss their biblical concerns. And I get that the Bible, as Christians, we're going to be incompatible with culture across the boardwalk. We'll come back to that in just a second. But I thought, where have I heard this argument before? And then I realized, oh, I know where I've heard this before. It was the same thing that black people who were called woke used to say about the term woke. I was like, oh, wait a minute. I remember this argument. There were black people who were being called woke that were thrown into a large basket because they may have agreed with one aspect of something. So like prime example, you could be if you weren't a black conservative that didn't agree with everything in the platform, if you said, well, I do think there's some racial injustice in the law or racial injustice in the church, you were considered woke. And it was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And woke man, and it was like, well, what do you mean by woke? And what does that mean? How do you define woke? And then all of a sudden, you were brought into everything that whatever people who were the conservatives defined woke as being, that was you. If you agree with just even one thing, like racial injustice, like you're supposed to believe there's nothing wrong, and if you do, you're woke. But now it's the Christian nationalists, the Christian conservatives are now experiencing the same thing. They're saying, hey, it's this, you can't make this stuff up. Let me show you what I mean by this. You can't make this up. Look at this. All right. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger so you get this. Look at this. Scholars define Christian nationalism as the belief that the United States was founded as a Christian nation and that its laws and culture should explicitly reflect Christian values. All right. The specific phrase white Christian nationalists highlights how these beliefs often overlap with white identity politics, protecting what some perceive as both cultural and racial heritage under a divine mandate. Some conservatives, however, argue that the label is a political psyop. This is what I've been hearing lots of psyop, meant to stigmatize Christian political engagement or imply that biblical convictions are inherently extremist. From this view, critics of the term see it as an attempt to silence traditional Christians by equating their faith-based civic participation with racial or authoritarian ideology, right? So this is what we're saying. This is what it means, right? This is the idea that's happening here. That a lot of people who are conservatives, right? They are dealing with people saying, oh, you're calling me a Christian nationalist or a white Christian nationalist because you're trying to stifle what I believe and what I think. That does not represent me. That's a fake name. That's fake news, essentially, right? But it was the same thing on the other side. Here's what woke happened, the term woke. The term woke began in the early 1900s among Black Americans to encourage vigilance against racial injustice, literally to stay woke to systemic oppression. In the early 1900s, that's what was happening, whether you like it or not in the culture. That was American society, codified in law, that black people you were allowed to be racist towards black people. And yes, it was the South, but it was also the North. Jackie Robinson was a baseball player for the Brooklyn Dodgers in the North and had a lot of problems, right? So it was everywhere, but the South was notorious for its implementation, right? So stay woke was just to help black people. It was like a slang term that said, hey, pay attention to the systemic oppression. During the Ferguson protests, that was 2014, and the rise of Black Lives Matter, it represented social awareness and solidarity, all right? So that's what it meant. Like, so by the late 2010s, conservatives began using woke as a pejorative shorthand for progressive causes, treating it as a catch-all for left-wing ideology or performative activism. Many black activists have since criticized this appropriation, noting how legitimate concern for racism or inequality became politically delegitimized through mocking or distortion. So this is incredible to me, watching this happen. Now, I have no political dog in the fight. I don't vote. I don't trust anyone at all anymore. I don't. Yes, I'm conservative by default, but I don't trust anyone anymore. I don't vote. I don't trust anyone because I've changed. People are like, why? How could you not vote? Because I'm going to explain why I've changed in a minute and what's happened, what I've seen happen, and why I have no political dog in the fight. I've done none. I don't trust any of them. I think there are values that are different for sure, but I do not trust anyone. I'm not saying you have to be me, so don't give me so we're supposed to not vote. I said, this is me. This is my personal conviction. I don't care if you vote or not. That's on you. I will give an account before God, and I do not think he's going to judge me for not having voted. I just don't think so. But I've changed, and I'll explain why in a few minutes. But this is the reality, right? It's conservatism, which is Christian nationalists called that, and woke is called that, the left, right? This is what's happening. I watched someone earlier today say, oh, but when the left goes to church, it's not a big deal, but when the right does, it's Christian nationalism, right? So there's this idea, there's this problem. And so basically the people in the video that I'm watching are basically saying you have no right to say that we're Christian nationalists. That's a smokescreen. That's not true. But years ago, when it were black people on the left, they were being called woke. They was like, what are you talking about? You don't even know what woke means. But there was such a movement from the conservatives to push it down the throat. But now the tables have turned. Now the term Christian nationalism is the new woke. And it's fascinating for me, who has no political dog in the fight. I am literally sitting in the stands, watching this tennis match and watching the ball go back and forth, watching to see whose serve is it. This is what it's like for me personally, watching this thing. Here's the other challenge, though. Here's a challenge. There were people, what Black Lives Matter did, Black Lives Matter decimated legitimate concerns for racial injustice in society, in churches, and so forth. There were black people that would agree there was some racial injustice going on in churches, in institutions, but Black Lives Matter came, and first of all, they're made in God's image, worthy of a certain respect. I did not like or trust them. I saw it coming. And then when I watched them do interviews talking about they're into witchcraft and Yoruba religion and all this stuff, I was like, I knew it. I never supported them, even if I liked and agreed with the hashtag Black Lives Matter when it first came out. I knew that they were a poison. And that's exactly what they were. Exactly what they were. And I did not bang with the left at all, as they were pushing an agenda of sexual ethics that was unbiblical, of a woman's right to choose that was unbiblical, of just a terrible representation of what it means to be a person, a human being, a believer, all these types of things. I couldn't believe it. I was watching this, couldn't believe it. Didn't roll with any of it. But there were people that were not like that, that just agreed with certain things. I know some people that just said, hey, I agree with racial injustice still happening in the law and all that. And what you would hear on the other side, you're just woke. And then you get all these stats. Black people are 13% of the population and commit 52% of the murders. But no one ever broke down those numbers. And you realize that, oh, out of 5,200 murders, the people that were arrested by the FBI that the black people did, that means only 0.00198% of black people would have committed a murder out of the 40-something million, only 5,200 arrests. You didn't hear those numbers. You heard Candace Owens and everyone say all these numbers and stats, and everyone jumped on them as if it meant something. They didn't say that black people were also 76% of the ethnicities that are actually exonerated for violent crimes. They didn't say that white males are 70+% of the ones who are into children inappropriately and who actually force themselves on other people, right? Assault women and things. They never hit those stats, right? So it was like, what's happening here? And all of a sudden you're being woke if you just thought this one thing was that, one thing. But there were people who were wild. There were people who were woke according to the standards of what people would say. They were wilding. But the problem was if you agreed with one or two things, but not all of that stuff, you were woke. It was the one drop rule. You agreed with this, racial injustice. It was woke. It was woke. This is why people struggle with people like Charlie Kirk, because he was pushing a narrative with Judeo-biblical values. It was like, wait a minute, bro. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Now it's hilarious to see Candace Owens now, who was the dog in the fight on that side, now the dog against the other side, right? It's the one drop rule. Well, in Christian nationalism, you got people who genuinely just love Jesus, who love their country, and who want to see biblical values that are closer to the scripture be implemented in society. Now, the Republican platform does not have that. There's nothing biblical about owning a gun and things like that. There's plenty of other things I could highlight. But there are genuine people, right, who believe in Jesus, love the Lord, may have even voted for Trump, right? May have even voted for Donald Trump, but they do not agree with certain things, right? There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with this, okay? Nothing wrong with this at all. But what happened is that these terms get codified into things, and you got people who may not do all of that stuff, but you got people who really do it. Now, just to show you this, before we get into this, let me show you this study. There's a study that has been done, all right? There's a study that has been done that is actually proving the point of what I'm saying, all right? Let's go here real quick, just so you don't think I'm talking out the side of my neck over here, all right? Here it is. Listen to this. At Oxford 2025, I watched this one. This is a long study. I was looking at it. It was incredible. An Oxford 2020 study found that both terms now function as identity cues. Woke, signaling alignment with progressive justice narratives, and Christian nationalism with conservative Christian identity. Each term activates moral and group boundaries to be accused of, either is often to be rhetorically expelled from political moderation. Both reflect a language of belonging, true Americans versus woke elites, or real Christians versus secular progressives, right? And then listen to what it says here. Let's keep going. Let me scroll it down to this so we can get this. I got my big old face right there. All right, listen to what it says here. It says, writers such as Neil Shenvi and the Gospel Coalition have described a woke right emerging within Christian nationalism, where conservative activists use the same awakening metaphor once used by social justice movements. Same awakening metaphor. It is fascinating to sit there and watch this and be like, wow, you guys are doing the exact same thing, using the exact same logic that they used. But when they did it, it was woke, left progressives. When you do it, it's biblical, and vice versa. It's really fascinating to watch this. It says this parallel rhetoric, each side claiming to have awakened to hidden oppression or corruption, reveals an ideological symmetry. One identifies systemic racism and social inequity as the great evil. The other identifies secularism and wokeness as threats to Christian civilization. Political scientists and media theorists find that both woke and Christian nationalist language serve to mobilize partisan emotion through moral panic narratives. Christian nationalist rhetoric frames political engagement as spiritual warfare to reclaim a divinely ordained America, while anti-woke discourse constructs progressive activism as a quasi-religious threat to freedom and faith. Each portrays opponents as existential dangers, transforming cultural disagreement into apocalyptic struggle. This is taken as an excerpt from a 2025 Oxford study looking at how both of those terms are used by each opposing side to create a narrative, and it's the same thing. It's the one drop rule. Now, I could, if I was in the mood to show you the study, I'd show you how many people were polled by this study and how many people who were called a term like Christian nationalists or woke that said, I do not identify with that term, and here's why. It was fascinating to read this. I thought I was the only one thinking this, and then I found this study and realized this is a crazy thing. It's crazy. It's the one drop rule. But here's the reality. There were people on the left that were wilding. That when you said they're woke, the way it was being defined by conservatives, yeah, I saw why you said that. But there were a lot of people that weren't. Well, now there are people who were Republicans wilding, right? That were on the other side. And like, if you say, well, these people are woke, they're not woke. It's like, no, they're not woke. They're not woke. But if you say they're Christian nationalists, well, what are you saying? What are you saying right now, right? Let me give you proof of this. Let me show you why I'm saying this. Let's go back to the tape. In October 2025, a major scandal erupted within the Young Republican National Federation after thousands of leaked Telegram messages revealed widespread use of racist, homophobic, anti-Semitic, and pro-Nazi rhetoric among state-level leaders. The group chat titled Restore Year War Room spanned from January to August 2025 and contained over 28,000 messages. Participants included officials and activists from Young Republican chapters in New York, Kansas, Arizona, and Vermont, several of whom worked for Republican lawmakers or held public office. There was praise for Adolf Hitler, slurs targeted at Black people, LGBTQ individuals, and Jewish people, terms like monkeys. You can read this F word is not the 4 letters, and appeared hundreds of times. Explicit discussions of violence, including references to assault, which is with the R word, and calls for political opponents to be executed or sent to the gas. I'm only doing that because I just got hit by a strike with YouTube. So I don't want this strike to happen. I don't want to get hit again with the strike. All right. So this is something that just happened. Right now, let's look at this. Here's some of the proof of some of these things. Listen, what these were some of the stuff that came out. Great. I love Hitler. Stay in the closet. FAGGOT. Right. I'm ready to watch people burn. I'd go to the zoo if I wanted to watch monkey play ball. Right. If we ever had a leak of this chat, we would be cooked for real, for real. When did we start bullying? They love the watermelon people, right? This is what was recently released, okay? This was by the Young Republican group. This is what it's by. This is by the Young Republican group chat, right? So if you're, is that not Christian nationalism? So you're supposed to think, this is, you see what's happening? You have people who are wilding, right? There are Christians who vote Republican that are godly people who love the Lord. May have even voted for Trump because they're Republican. They would have voted if Pusty McMichaels was on the ticket, right? That's who they vote, right? You can't say they agree with every single thing but now they're being lobbied in because stuff like this happens and it proves the point. I told you. They're white Christian nationalism. This is what it sounds like. They're bigoted, they're racist, they're homophobic. All this stuff is coming out. So if you're not doing those things, but you're a Christian, and you say, well, you're just calling white Christian nationalism as a term, a slur, to stop us from having political office. What about these type of texts, though? The people who did this were important people. Mind you, the members of this group chat included Peter Gunter, the former chair of the New York State Young Republicans, Bobby Walker, chair of the New York State Young Republicans and former vice chair, Samuel Douglas, state senator from northern Vermont, Breonna Douglas, Samuel Douglas's wife, William Hendricks, vice chair of Kansas Young Republicans, Alex Dwyer, chair of the Kansas Young Republicans, this is all public, so I'm just saying it was public. Annie K. Cady, New York's National Committee member, Joe Maglino, general counsel for the New York State Young Republicans, Rachel Hope, Arizona Young Republicans events chair, right? The Young Republicans includes members aged 18 to 40 with a chapter in every state. It recruits and trains young people to run for political office. And they even said, whoa, we're going to be under the gun if this comes out. And some Republican lawmakers are outraged. Some are downplaying like it's not a big deal, right? But people who said they agree with racial injustice were called woke, one drop rule. Just like people who don't agree with what's being said are called Christian nationalists, one drop rule. You cannot make this stuff up. You cannot make it up. People are going to get offended at me. Do it. Be offended. I'm presenting to you facts. Presenting to you facts. Be offended. I understand. Because you're theological. I'm not about. I'm trying to be about spirit and truth, right? This is what's happening. YRNF versus BLM. It was the same thing. BLM was wilding. YRNF is wilding. Is it wrong to say that they're Republican, Christian nationalists is a bad thing when you have people like this? Was it wrong to say you're woke if you? It's a one drop rule. One drop rule. And here's the problem with it. You see, grace is in the nuance. Biblically speaking, right? God knows what a broken and contrite heart looks like. God knows the genuineness, right? If you say, look, imagine this, right? So after Judas betrayed Jesus and after Jesus was arrested, Judas, it says he realized his error. He goes back to the Sanhedrin, confesses his sin. He was remorseful, confessed his sin, said, I betrayed innocent blood, gave back the money that they gave him, right? He was remorseful. He repented, gave back the money he gave them, walked away, right? But it wasn't genuine repentance. He hung himself when he died, right? But we would tell people to do that all day, right? It would be wrong to say, hey, I don't trust your repentance because Judas did the same thing you did. He felt bad. He did this. You're no different than Judas, right? No, but when you understand the nuance and you understand that, how does David, after committing on paper a far greater sin than Judas, on paper, obviously not, he betrayed him. But I mean, if you compare someone committed adultery, had the dude killed so he could marry his wife, that sounds much harsher than someone betrayed a close friend, right? On paper, David was worse than Judas, on paper, right? But David writes Psalm 51, cries out to the Lord, confesses it. God said David was a man after my own heart, even though on paper, you know why? Because God understands the condition of the heart. It's not all the same thing. There's nuance. There's grace in the nuance. But if you lump everybody into one thing, you don't have to have grace for anybody. You don't have to care about anyone. This is what happens. This is what's happening in public discourse. You don't have to care about anyone if you call them all Christian nationalists. You don't have to care. They're good people, Republicans, conservatives who voted. What are you talking about? But you call them that term, you dismiss everything about them. There's you don't have to give them any grace. There's no nuance. You call all these people woke just because they thought there's some racial injustice, and then you put them at odds and made them look like they were insane and judgmental, and it had everyone, the full force of everyone who agreed with your definition. There was no nuance. When you do that, how do you love your neighbor as yourself? How do you love your neighbor as yourself? You can't. And this is what gets us to what's really happening right now. Here's the real issue. This is what I honestly think is happening. This is what I think the Lord is doing. We need eternal eyes. This is what the Lord is doing, right? Here's what I think is really happening. Matthew 7, Jesus said this, judge not that you be not judged. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, but there is a log in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. This is what I think is happening, what the Lord is doing. I'm about to end, but I want to say two things. One, I think what's happening right now is we are witnessing God applying this scripture, right? He said this is what he says. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. I hope I was balanced enough so people will be like, why are you attacking the conservatives? I think a lot of conservatives are being harshly judged. But I get it. It's the one drop rule. And sadly, they started the one drop rule with judging the left, but judging people that saying people are woke. Not saying, hey, let me hear your argument. Let me hear your argument. It was just like, oh, you're just woke. As soon as you mention anything about race, I bet you there are people who are watching this video that as soon as I say anything about race or read the Jim Crow, the one drop rule, people log whatever, and they're going to unfollow me. I could care less. I'm so glad that whether this channel grows or not is not a concern to me anymore. I'm so glad I'm freed from that. I can make whatever content I want. If I lose 1,000 subscribers or gain 1,000, it's all the same to me. I'm going to try to give you truth. What's happening here is that the conservatives started it and now they're being judged by the measure that they use. And it's so fascinating because they're using the same exact logic. Oh, you're just using a term that doesn't, you're trying to, just like they said about woke, that's not what woke is. You took a term that Black people used to survive in the early 20th century and made it a term that called people what they were bringing up lies. So now the Lord is saying, okay, let me put it on the conservative Christians, the moral high ground. You know why God's doing this? Because none of this has to do with holiness. God wants his people to have eternal eyes. We're in a much deeper war right now. Ephesians 6 says we do not wrestle with flesh and blood, right? That's what it says. We do not wrestle with flesh and blood. There's a much deeper war happening. And many Christians are so politicized, so theological. They got God in there, but they don't realize how much it's syncretistically mixed, that they don't even realize that they could be believing a different gospel. They think they're applying the gospel, when in reality, you may be believing a different gospel. Let me explain what I mean, and then you can judge me all you want. We're after eternal eyes here. That we're trying to think, what is he? Let's try to see this from the lens of eternity. Now, of course, I'm just a human being. I don't have all the answers for those of you that are going to judge me, but this is what I think. I'm a Christian, I'm a pastor. This is how I approach scripture. I'm trying to apply, what does the word say? What's the real issue? If we do not wrestle with flesh and blood, but against principalities, authorities, and cosmic beings in the heavenly places, then God says the real issue is Satan and demons and other types of spiritual entities that are evil, that are having their way in society. 2 Timothy 2:26 says that unbelievers have been taken captive by the devil to do his will. So treat them with respect and share the gospel with them in such a way so that they can be released from that captivity. Do you think people talk like that? Do your political constituents talk like that about the left? Do the people that you know, that know Christians, do they talk like that about people on the right? Do they think like, hey, they're the unbelievers? Do they think that? Eternal lies. Here's the real war that's happening right now. This is what I believe to be true. There's a war of moralism versus holiness. This is the real war. Eternal eyes, brothers and sisters. Moralism versus holiness. And Christians are sliding into it. People that have super followings, who have been largely, I would say, good believers, faithful Christians, are sliding into moralism. Holiness is something different. Let me explain what I mean. Let me give you this passage real quick, and I'm going to get out your face. All right, listen to this. This is Paul writing to the church in Corinth. He's writing to people, a church that he planted, right? He wrote 4 letters to Corinth. We have his 2nd and 4th letter. We call them 1st and 2nd Corinthians. He's writing to the church that he spent the most time with. He knows and loves these people. And there are people that are coming to him that are saying they're apostles of Christ, that are teaching different things than what he taught. And he's mocking them, calling them super apostles. And Paul is genuinely shocked. Like I said at the beginning of the video, he's genuinely shocked that a church that he pastored, laid a good foundation of, is actually walking away from that foundation. They're walking away. Here's what he says in 2 Corinthians 11. I'm going to hit two portions of it. He says this: I wish you would bear with me in a little foolishness. Do bear with me, for I feel a divine jealousy for you, since I betrothed you to one husband to present you as a pure virgin of Christ. So you hear his pastoral heart. I presented you. It was my job to present you mature in Christ. Just listen to his heart. Then he says this: but I am afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve by his cunning, your thoughts will be led astray from a sincere and pure devotion to Christ. This is prophetic. Listen to this. But I'm afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve by his cunning, so he's talking to people who are believers, people that he pastored, that he knows no truth. And he's saying, I'm afraid that the serpent has deceived you, right? From us and led astray, not just slowly led astray happens over time. Led astray from a sincere and pure devotion to Christ. Then he says this in verse 4, which is incredible. For if someone comes and proclaims another Jesus than the one we proclaimed, so a Jesus with different values, different thing, another Jesus than the one we proclaimed, or if you receive a different spirit from the one you received, or if you accept a different gospel from the one you accepted, you put up with it readily enough. Listen to what he's saying here. That there are people among you preaching a different Jesus, you're receiving a different spirit, and you're believing a different gospel, and you're not doing anything about it. It says you put up with it readily enough. Indeed, I consider that I am not in the least inferior to these super apostles. He's mocking them because he knows who they really are, but he's concerned, genuinely shocked, that believers that he pastored, that he knows, are being led astray and believing a different Jesus, receiving a different spirit. Ooh, that's a different video. And believing a different gospel. Once saved, always saved? Well, it's possible that you can be a Christian, genuine, and be led astray from a sincere and pure devotion to Christ, and believe a different Jesus, receive a different spirit, and believe a different gospel. Paul is saying he's concerned. And let me tell you, and then he goes on to go back and forth about these super apostles and why they're not trustworthy. And then listen to what he says, because he's going to explain what the real war is. It's not left versus right. Here's the real war. And he says this. He says this in verse 12. And what am I doing? What I'm doing, I will continue to do. Right? It says, I will continue to do, in order to undermine the claim of those who would like to claim that in their boasted mission, they work on the same terms as we do. So there are people teaching a different Jesus, a different gospel, and giving, and people are receiving a different spirit and saying they're the same as Paul. They're saying it's Christian. We're Christian. That's what Paul's saying. He said, I'm going to continue to do what I'm doing to undermine the claim that these people, that they boast on, that they work on the same terms as we do, that they're teaching you a pure and sincere devotion to Christ. Paul says, I'm pushing back against that. I'm going to work to go against that. They're teaching a different Christianity, something different. He said, for such men are false apostles, deceitful workmen, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ. Then he says this, and no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. So it's no surprise if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness. Their end will correspond to their deeds. Brothers and sisters, hear what I'm saying. This is what Paul's saying. That Satan appears as an angel of light. We know light is connected to righteousness and holiness. And he says, but it's not true. It's not real righteousness. And then he says, so it's no surprise if his servants, people who are actually following the devil, also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness, servants of morality. Here is the real war. And I could unpack this in a whole thing. I'm going to leave you with these thoughts. What we see happening, the real war that's happening among Christians, I'm not talking about the culture, I'm talking about in the church. The enemy, Satan is not after the world, he has the world. He's targeting the church. And here's the real war that's happening. It's a spiritual warfare, but it's morality versus holiness, right? It's morality. Morality is not holiness. Morality is just Judeo-Christian values, right? Judeo-Christian values. Morality is being a good, productive member of society. Morality is trying to be a good person and having different values, and you stand by these Judeo-Christian values. That's morality. And everyone can be moral. Everyone has morality because we're all made in the image of Christ. We're made in his likeness. So there's going to be a level of morality in every person. Even serial killers are smiling pictures. Shameless plug on the album I did. Go look, check it out. They didn't start off that way. They had some morality and all of that. They grew up, some of them in loving homes. Morality is something that everyone has because we're made in God's image. We're made in his likeness. Why do you think Satan has to appear as an angel of light? Why do you think his servants have to appear as servants of righteousness? Why do they have to appear moral? Why is everyone who does not truly believe in Jesus, why aren't they all just killing people, robbing people, harming people, doing all these terrible things? Why are there all these religions in the world? Every religion that we know of is moral in some senses. They all think it's wrong to lie, it's wrong to steal, or in some way, shape, or form. There's morality in all of these religions. Why? Because morality is not holiness. Satan appears as an angel of morality. He loves morality. So his servants appear servants of righteousness. They're moral. So morality is what anyone can. That's why every religion is moral. Look, Satan knows that he has to deceive us based on the way God designed us. The reason why there's not a bunch of people who are serial killers and so forth is because that would be immoral to most people, even if they don't believe in Jesus. There are atheists who are very moral people because morality is something that is inherent in all people, even if people eventually disregard that morality. It's inherent in the vast majority of people because we're made in God's image. But holiness is something different. You see, holiness, everyone's not holy because holiness means to be set apart. In fact, while everyone can be moral because we were made in God's image, holiness can only happen if you are conformed to the image of his son. That's Romans 8:29. For those he foreknew, he predestined to be conformed to the image of his son, right? If anyone who believes in Jesus walk as he walked, purify himself as he is pure, right? Holiness requires the Lord. It requires a deposit of the Holy Spirit. Galatians 5:17. For the flesh is against the spirit and the spirit against the flesh. Holiness cannot happen by everyone because you have to be dependent. And holiness is not about being a good person. It's about obeying Christ, imitating Jesus. That's the difference. Morality is trying to be a good person. And often you want to be a better good person than these people. But holiness is like, I'm trying to follow Christ. I'm trying to obey Jesus. I'm doing this because I love the Lord. I want to honor the Lord. You can't do that unless you're being conformed to the image of his son. But as 2 Corinthians 11 teaches us, you can have been being conformed and eventually move your way over to morality, receiving a different gospel, a different Jesus, a different spirit. Man, if I had time, I would swing this bat hard because this is what's happening among Christians on all sides. But right now, I'm talking about the right. Many of you are moral. You're not pursuing holiness. It's morality. You're a good person. You want Judeo-Christian values and you're confused. Holiness says pray for your enemies, love your enemies. It says treat them kindly and heap burning coals on their head. Morality says you're a better good person than these people, so judge and talk about these people because you're more moral than them. Holiness says when your enemy is thirsty, give him something to eat and drink. Holiness says we have to agonize and strive for peace with everyone. Strive for peace with everyone. Hebrews 12:14, and the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. Holiness is not morality. Now, there's morality in holiness, but it's not the same thing. You can be moral and not holy. Do you think Jesus died to be a morally good person? No. You don't need to be dependent on God to be moral because we're created in his image. We're already moral people. Not moral enough to go to heaven without Jesus, but we're good. We're genuinely good people. We're moral. That's everyone. But to be holy, to be set apart, to have the spirit of it, you got to live differently. And what I'm watching happen among a lot of people who at one point were pursuing holiness, they're now believing a different gospel. They're believing a different Jesus. They've received a different spirit. So now they're okay insulting, being angry, being bitter, affirming things, going back on what they said. I remember people said Trump was a Christian a few years ago. Now people say, I didn't vote for a pastor. I voted for a president. Oh, how it changes. Morality, you can move. You can change what morality is. Holiness, oh, you can't change that. Because holiness is exclusively about trying to imitate Jesus Christ. Let me make this clear. Christianity is not a religion. It's not even just a relationship. It's an imitation. It's imitating a person. It's not keeping a set of rules. It's not law keeping. It's love keeping. I have an intimate relationship with God, and I'm living in light of that relationship. This is what's lost. This is gone. And I'm watching Christians be careful. Be careful. Because many of you are slipping into morality. You're a good moral person, and you're a better moral person. You're a better good person than the left or the right, whatever you say. But that's not holiness. Holiness is different. Holiness is harder. Holiness needs Jesus. It needs the Spirit of God to transform us so that we imitate Jesus. And that is the real war. And that's why I reject all of this stuff. Because I don't want to be moral. I'm trying to be holy. And to be holy, I can't submit to the civilian pursuits. I can't. So I don't care. Take this for what you want. Do with it what you want. Unfollow if you need to. Totally get it. But you do your own research. Morality and holiness. Jesus himself said this in Matthew 5. Your righteousness must exceed that of the Pharisees. Well, what's the Pharisees' righteousness? It was all external. Read Matthew 23. Woe to you, Pharisees! You clean the outside, but the inside had bones and skulls. And clean the inside, and the outside will be clean. He said you have to be more mature than that to be hypocrites. He said Matthew 23. The Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. Verse 2. So observe what they teach, but don't imitate their lifestyle. They can teach you things, but don't imitate their lifestyle. So people can have Judeo-Christian values. They can have biblical morality. They can agree with things that the Bible seems to affirm and be disqualified. Because Jesus said, I'm going to let people who know Moses' law teach you, even though they're disqualified from eternity. Brothers and sisters, we need to have eternal eyes. Are you seeing what the Bible is actually saying? Not are you applying it through a political lens? A lot of these people who are saying, I'm just trying to apply my Christianity in the public square, are actually lowering the standards of holiness to morality. And it's not going to work. You know why? Because Satan is the God of morality. Jesus is the God of holiness. And there's a difference. And there's much more I could say, but I won't. Grace and peace. See you on the next stream.